Step 6 is to minimize dietary contaminants. And here we're talking about agrochemicals, environmental contaminants, the products of high temperature cooking, and food additives. And I'm going to go through this very, very quickly, but agrochemicals, we're talking about pesticides that are concentrated in conventional produce and other conventionally grown foods, and all the veterinary drugs, the hormones and antibiotics and antimicrobial agents, which are mainly in meat, poultry, and fish and dairy products. The solution, simple. Eat organic, if you can, as much as possible. And you can look at the environmental working groups, Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. They rate about 50 different fruits and vegetables, and the 12 with the highest pesticide content are called the Dirty Dozen. And the 15 with the lowest pesticide content are called the Clean 15, and they update it every single year. And then environmental contaminants, things like heavy metals and persistent organic pollutants like PCBs, DDT, and dioxins. The most concentrated sources of environmental contaminants are fish, meat, and dairy products. The solutions here, eat lower on the food chain and, of course, eat plants. The products of high temperature cooking, we're talking about things like heterocyclic amines, which are cancer-causing chemicals that are formed when we cook meat, poultry, or fish at high temperatures. They don't form in plants because plants don't contain any of the creatine or creatinine you need to make heterocyclic amines. Then there's polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. These are known mutagens. They're linked with all sorts of cancers. They're present in grilled and charred foods. They come from the incomplete burning of carbon, so they're in all foods, meat or plant forms, and can form at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or higher cooking. In order to reduce them, you just don't want to blacken your foods. Acrylamide is a compound that's formed in starchy foods, especially potato products, that are cooked with dry heat or with oil at high temperatures. And you can see the most and acrylamide, again, is a potential carcinogen. The most concentrated sources are sweet potato chips and regular potato chips. And we see it in things like rye crisp bread and French fries and coffee. Coffee's not really fair here because we're looking at 100 gram servings, and you eat 5 grams of coffee or something, so it's a little bit unfair there. Ready-to-eat cereals and so on, a little bit there, not much. And then advanced glycation end products, which are strongly associated with diabetes risk. And advanced glycation end products, they impair immune function, they accelerate aging, and they increase risk of just about every disease you can think of. And look at this, the most concentrated source. And these are really, advanced glycation end products are really just the final end irreversible products of the Maillard reaction, which is that browning reaction in food. But bacon, broiled and boiled frankfurters, fried meat, poultry, fish, even butter, but even grilled or fried tofu and other foods can have some advanced glycation end products. The solutions here, again, eat more raw food, use moist cooking methods like steaming and stewing and boiling and, like a soup. These will produce fewer products of oxidation. Be very savvy with dry heat. Saute with water, broth, or wine. Use the lowest temperatures possible. And again, avoid blackening your food. And harmful food additives like preservatives and artificial colors and flavors and all of those things, you want to minimize your intake. But the most common additive is salt. And 70 to 80% of salt comes from processed foods, even what we think of as healthy processed foods. And if you look at this list, you can see, I don't know why it didn't come up one at the time, but basically you can get, 300 to 500 milligrams in one veggie burger. You need to look at this though. 1 ounce of cornflakes or Raisin Bran has over 300 milligrams of sodium. More than you'd get if you ate an ounce of potato chips and an ounce of peanuts combined. Now, this is really shocking to people because why? Peanuts taste salty, salted peanuts. Potato chips taste salty. Corn flakes or Raisin Bran don't. And so you go, why? How could that be that it's higher? It's because when you put salt on the surface of a food, it tastes really salty. But when you put it through a batter, it's not the pronounced flavor anymore. And so that's why it's important to read labels. The most healthful foods of all have no label. They have one ingredient: broccoli, blueberries. Those are the foods. But what you want to look for when you read labels is labels with a short ingredient list and ingredients you actually understand, that you recognize as food. You want to minimize your use of labels. And the last step, step 7, get lean if you can. Eat whole, unprocessed, or minimally processed foods as grown. Steer clear of processed foods with added fat, sugar, and salt. Eat until you're 80% full. Harry Hatchie Boo. Choose less calorically dense foods. Oil is super calorically dense. Sugar is super calorically dense. And whole plant foods have a much lower caloric density. So what does that mean? It means you can eat a lot and not get so many calories and feel satisfied. Drink water, not sugar. And increase your physical activity. Aim for about 60 minutes a day if you can. Make sure all of your nutrient needs are met. And so this is the food guide that was in our books that we developed. And essentially, if you follow the guide, it's pretty much foolproof. So just winding up, the take-home message here is simple. Every time you eat or drink, you either feed disease or you fight disease. When you're fighting disease, you want every calorie that crosses your lips to be fighting disease. You can choose to fight disease with the most powerful medicine on the planet, whole plant foods, organic preferably. And I want to end by telling you the rest of the story about my dad. About 2 years after the incident that I told you about at the beginning of the lecture, my dad had a stroke. And it wasn't a super serious stroke, but he was taken to the hospital, and when he was taken to the hospital, they found out his blood glucose was over 500 milligrams per deciliter. His blood pressure was over 120, it was over 220 over 120. So his blood pressure was through the roof. He was diabetic. He had had a heart attack he didn't know about. And his blood vessels were completely destroyed. And his doctor said to him, if you stop smoking, if you don't stop smoking, you might live 3 months. If you do, you might live 3 years. My dad wasn't even 50 years of age yet. And I can remember sitting on my dad's hospital bed with him, and we were both crying. And he said to me, I don't want to die. I want to see my grandchildren grow up. And I want to dance with my sweetheart at our 50th wedding anniversary. And you know, I thought it was so sad that my dad had to get hit over the head with a hammer before he realized that without health, there is no freedom. He wanted to be free to do what he wanted to do. But when your health gets snatched away, your freedom gets snatched away right along with it. My dad ended up living almost 30 years instead of 3. He didn't make the changes Carlos made. I wish he would have, because he'd still be alive had he done that. But instead of bacon and eggs, he ate oatmeal for breakfast. He did some things that he could do, and we had him with us so he could see his grandchildren graduate, and he could dance at his 50th wedding anniversary. And he died 8 years ago. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't miss him terribly. And I wish he could see his great-grandchildren, my grandchildren. But I just want to leave you with the thought that there's nothing more important than your health. Because without it, you can't do what you love to do. And you know, people say, but I just don't want to eat that way. It's hard and I might not like it. You know what I can tell you? One thing I can guarantee is that as you change, the more you change, the more your health will change. And as you change, your palate changes. And those foods you thought were so yummy become disgusting. They don't even taste like food anymore. And the foods that you thought were disgusting taste wonderful. You actually become addicted to greens. You know, it's a whole different world. And I'll tell you, you do not enjoy your food any less when you start eating healthfully. If anything, I think you enjoy it more because you appreciate the real taste of real food. And so with that, I will stop, and I know everybody's probably pretty anxious to taste the food that's coming. Thank you so much.